"She is not here to replace my wife," Ethan Montgomery said, and somehow that made everyone in the boardroom understand that she was. 58 floors above Manhattan, inside the glass conference room of Montgomery Dynamics, the morning light came in cold and silver, slicing across the long black table, the polished nameplates, the untouched water glasses, and the skyline reflected in every wall. Claire Montgomery stood just inside the door with a black leather folder pressed against her side, her navy coat still damp at the shoulders from the rain outside. She had been invited as a legacy shareholder observer, a phrase so carefully small it almost sounded polite. The assistant at reception had not met her eyes when handing her the visitor badge. Observer, not founder, not early investor, not the woman who had once spent her nights rewriting pitch decks while Ethan slept on a borrowed sofa in their Boston apartment. Just observer. Then Claire saw the chair. Halfway down the table, beside Ethan's seat at the head, where her nameplate had sat for years during private strategy meetings, there was now a new one in brushed silver. Sophia Blake. The woman sitting behind it wore an ivory suit, pearl earrings, and the calm smile of someone enjoying a room before earning it. Her manicured fingers rested lightly on the nameplate, as if she were keeping it warm. Ethan stood near the screen in a charcoal suit, handsome in the controlled way that made investors trust him before employees learned to fear his silence. He did not look surprised to see Claire standing there. He looked relieved that she had arrived after Sophia was already seated. "Claire," he said, smooth enough for the board minutes. "We are just beginning. No apology, no explanation, no chair pulled out." The board members shifted in their seats, their eyes moving from Claire to Sophia and back again, calculating how much pain could be ignored if it arrived in expensive clothes. Margaret Hale, the board chair, sat at the far end of the table with a sealed folder beside her laptop, her face unreadable. Claire noticed the folder because she had signed the final transfer documents at 6:40 that morning, while the city was still dark and the coffee in her hotel room had gone cold. Ethan lifted the remote and turned toward the screen. The company logo appeared in blue light. Montgomery Dynamics, Future Leadership Initiative. Beneath it was Sophia's photograph. "Sophia will be advising us on brand vision and executive positioning," Ethan said. "This company has entered a new stage. We need people who understand influence, image, and loyalty." Sophia lowered her eyes modestly, but her smile found Claire across the table. "I am honored," she said. "Some women help build the beginning. Others are meant to lead the next chapter." The sentence landed softly, but the room felt it like glass cracking under a careful heel. Claire did not sit. She looked at the silver nameplate, then at Ethan's hand on the remote, then at the company logo she had helped choose when they could not afford a designer. Her throat tightened, but her face stayed still. Ethan gestured toward the last chair near the wall. "There is a seat for you at the end, Claire." At the end. Of the table. Of the marriage. Of the story he thought he controlled. Claire walked to the chair without a word, placed her black leather folder on the table, and sat down as the city glittered behind her like a witness waiting for the meeting to reach the truth. The chair Sophia occupied had not always been a symbol of status. In the beginning, there had been no boardroom, no skyline, no brushed silver nameplates, no assistants whispering outside glass walls. There had only been a narrow apartment in Boston with heat that failed in January, a folding table covered in takeout containers, and Ethan hunched over a secondhand laptop, while Claire sat beside him correcting financial projections until 2 in the morning. Montgomery Dynamics had been a name on a pitch deck before it became a company on the 58th floor of a Manhattan tower. Claire remembered choosing the first version of the logo because Ethan had wanted something sharp and cold, and she had said technology still needed to feel human. She remembered standing in a copy shop at midnight, waiting for investor packets to print while snow gathered against the windows. She remembered calling angel investors from their kitchen, using a calm voice while their bank account sat low enough to make groceries feel strategic. Ethan had ideas then, bright and restless, but ideas did not pay payroll, file incorporation papers, or convince cautious people to risk money on a man with more ambition than proof. Claire did those things quietly. She sold a pair of sapphire earrings her grandmother had left her and told Ethan they were only jewelry. She used the money to cover the first server bill, the one that kept their prototype alive long enough for a demonstration in Cambridge. He cried after that meeting, not loudly, not in front of anyone, but in the parking garage with his forehead against the steering wheel and her hand on his shoulder. "When this works," he had said, "they will know you built it with me." She believed him because love made future promises sound like signed contracts. Years later, after the first funding round, Ethan gave her a silver pen in a black velvet case. It was not expensive enough to impress anyone else, but it meant everything then. He told her she should use it to sign the first advisor agreement with the company. Claire still remembered the sound of the pen gliding across paper, the little scratch of ink that made her feel visible. That pen now lay near Ethan's right hand at the head of the table, placed beside the remote for Sophia's presentation. He had kept the object and discarded the meaning. As the boardroom screen shifted to Sophia's second slide, Claire looked down the table and saw the years folding over one another. Boston snow, cold coffee, printer ink, empty bank accounts, investor calls, the first employee badge, the first office lease, the first night she slept on a couch in the server room because a product launch had failed and someone needed to stay awake. No one in this room saw that version of her. They saw the wife seated at the end, quiet, formally invited, carefully diminished. Ethan's voice moved through the glass room, confident and clean. "Sophia understands the next stage of visibility," he said. "We cannot remain emotionally tied to the habits that got us here." Claire felt the sentence brush against her like cold air. Habits. That was what he called the years she had carried him through uncertainty. Sophia turned slightly in Claire's old chair, her ivory sleeve touching the polished nameplate. Claire did not react. She only opened the black leather folder in front of her and rested her hand on the first page, where the words change of control waited in dark ink, patient and precise. Ethan clicked to the next slide, and the room obeyed the blue light on the screen more quickly than it had obeyed Claire's years of work. Future Leadership Initiative expanded into 5 clean bullet points, each one polished enough to hide the fingerprints behind it. Market repositioning, executive visibility, investor confidence, brand discipline, cultural renewal. The words sounded harmless until Claire saw Sophia's name placed beneath them as if she had been waiting there all along. An assistant moved quietly around the table, collecting old agenda packets and replacing them with updated versions bound in pale gray folders. When she reached Claire, she hesitated for half a second before setting the new packet beside her water glass. Claire looked at the top page. Her name had been moved to the attendance line under Legacy Observer. Sophia Blake had been inserted under Executive Track Discussion. The ink was clean. That made it worse. There was no crossed-out name, no visible hand pushing Claire aside, only the kind of corporate neatness that made erasure look administrative. Ethan continued speaking at the head of the table, one hand holding the remote, the other resting near the silver pen he had once given Claire after their first funding round. "We have to move away from emotional decision-making," he said. "Montgomery Dynamics cannot be run by nostalgia." A board member near the window lowered his eyes to the packet. Margaret Hale did not move, but her gaze shifted briefly toward the sealed folder beside her laptop. Sophia leaned forward in Claire's former chair, her ivory sleeve brushing the table edge, her voice soft enough to seem generous. "I respect what came before," she said. "But companies grow when they stop confusing history with leadership." The sentence was aimed at the room, but it landed at the end of the table. Claire felt the old familiar heat rise behind her eyes, the kind that came not from surprise, but from watching someone step on a place you had once made sacred. She did not blink it away too quickly. She let herself feel it, then lowered her gaze to the agenda packet. Legacy Observer. It was almost elegant in its cruelty. Ethan glanced at her then, perhaps expecting protest, perhaps hoping for it. A reaction would let him make this about temperament. Silence forced it to remain about conduct. "Claire has been invited today out of respect for her prior association with the company," he said, turning back to the board. "But governance belongs to those still committed to the future." Prior association. The words passed through the boardroom like cold air slipping under a locked door. Claire remembered signing payroll when Ethan had been too ashamed to tell the first engineers they might not be paid on time. She remembered sitting on the floor of a server room with a flashlight in her teeth, reading outage logs while he called investors from the hallway. She remembered the first company holiday party, 12 people and grocery store cupcakes, when Ethan had raised a paper cup and said none of this would exist without my wife. Now his wife sat at the end of the table beneath a visitor badge. Sophia lifted her chin slightly, encouraged by the silence. "I think elegance matters in leadership," she said. "A company should know how to present itself beside power." Claire looked at the silver pen near Ethan's hand. He had brought it to the meeting like an emblem of his own rise, forgetting the woman who had first opened the velvet case. Outside the glass walls, Manhattan glittered beneath the rain, indifferent and bright. Claire placed one hand on her black leather folder and slid it 1 inch closer. The sound was small, but Margaret Hale heard it. So did Ethan. For the first time that morning, his hand paused above the remote. Claire had not prepared that folder in anger. Anger was too loud for the kind of work she had done. After Ethan moved out of their home and into the version of himself that photographed better, Claire spent 3 weeks letting the silence teach her what the marriage had hidden. She did not post statements. She did not call reporters. She did not sit across from friends at lunch and explain the shape of betrayal until pity became another room she had to survive. Instead, she went back to work. Whitmore Capital Trust occupied 2 quiet floors in a limestone building near Bryant Park, far from the glass tower where Ethan performed certainty for cameras. It had been founded by Claire's mother, a woman who believed money should never enter a room without discipline. Claire had grown up hearing terms other children did not learn until business school: preferred shares, debt covenants, voting rights, distressed assets, convertible notes. For years, she had used that knowledge to help Ethan build Montgomery Dynamics, then stepped aside when he began telling people instinct had carried him there. After the separation, she stopped stepping aside. The first file came from an early investor who wanted out quietly. The second came from a venture fund tired of Ethan's vanity, spending, and missed product deadlines. The third was a block of convertible debt held by a regional bank that had lost patience with quarterly excuses wrapped in innovation language. Claire read every line herself. She sat late in conference rooms with legal counsel, valuation analysts, and trust officers, her hair pinned low, coffee untouched beside stacks of documents. Numbers did not flatter. They did not lie to be charming. They showed her what Ethan had done with the company when no one in the boardroom wanted to embarrass the founder. Marketing budgets had swollen while engineering teams lost people. Executive travel looked healthier than research spending. The brand strategy proposal Sophia now smiled beside had already appeared in draft form weeks earlier, dressed up as leadership evolution. Claire had looked at it once and closed the file. She was not buying the company to punish a mistress. Sophia was only a symptom wearing pearls. Claire was buying control because something she had helped build was being used as a mirror for Ethan's ego, while the people who kept it alive were asked to do more with less. The negotiations moved quietly. Whitmore Capital purchased the debt first, then acquired voting agreements from tired shareholders, then secured a controlling position through a private block sale completed before dawn on the morning of the meeting. Claire signed the final page with the same kind of pen Ethan had once given her, though not the same pen. His silver one remained in his possession, polished into a trophy. Hers moved across paper with no ceremony. At 6:40, legal counsel slid the closing packet toward her and said, "You are now the controlling representative." Claire had looked out the hotel window at Manhattan, still waking under rain, and felt no triumph. Only steadiness. Now, at the end of the boardroom table, while Ethan spoke about loyalty and Sophia sat in Claire's old chair, that same closing packet rested inside the black leather folder beneath her hand. The room thought she had come to witness her own erasure. Claire had come to stop it from becoming company policy. Margaret Hale had chaired enough board meetings to know when a room was being managed instead of led. She watched Ethan from the far end of the table, watched the way he moved through the presentation with the smooth confidence of a man who believed speed could prevent questions. Each slide appeared before the last one had fully settled in the room. Each phrase was shaped to sound responsible, while quietly moving power toward the woman seated in Claire's old chair. Brand vision, executive alignment, cultural renewal, strategic loyalty. Margaret had seen those words used before, often when a founder wanted the board to bless a personal decision in corporate clothing. She did not interrupt yet. Her laptop screen had dimmed once from inactivity, but beside it, the sealed folder from legal counsel remained untouched, its cream label facing upward beneath the conference room lights. Change of control disclosure. She had received the first message 6 minutes before the meeting began, while Ethan was still greeting board members near the coffee service and Sophia was arranging her nameplate as if it were jewelry. The message had come from outside counsel, marked urgent and privileged. Closing completed. Voting control transferred. Buyer representative present in meeting. Margaret had read the sentence twice, then looked across the glass room at Claire standing near the door with rain still darkening the shoulders of her coat. That was when the morning changed for her. Not visibly. Not enough for Ethan to notice. Only enough for Margaret to stop seeing Claire as a legacy observer and begin seeing her as the quiet center of the room. Now Ethan was still speaking. Sophia's role will allow us to reshape public perception before the next capital event, he said. The board should understand that image is no longer secondary. It is survival. Sophia nodded at the right moment, her hands folded over the updated agenda packet. She looked perfectly placed, perfectly lit, perfectly unaware that the structure beneath her had already shifted. Margaret glanced at the numbers in her own packet. The company had missed 2 product milestones. Employee attrition in engineering had doubled. Research spending had been reduced while executive branding expenses grew line by line, dressed up as market preparation. She thought of the employees 3 floors below who did not know the meeting above them was deciding whether their work would be protected or polished into a press release. Her phone vibrated once beside the water glass. A final message from counsel appeared on the screen. All required filings delivered. Board recognition required before vote on executive appointment. Margaret placed one finger over the phone, not to hide it, but to steady the moment. Claire saw the gesture from the end of the table. She did not smile. She did not lean forward. She only rested her hand on the black leather folder, the one that contained documents Margaret now understood were not symbolic. They were the reason this meeting could not continue as Ethan had planned. A board member near the window cleared his throat. Before we move to discussion, should we address the capitalization update? Ethan's eyes sharpened. That can wait. Margaret closed her laptop halfway. The sound was soft, but it cut through the blue glow of the presentation. No, she said. It cannot. Sophia's smile faltered. Ethan turned toward her slowly, the remote still in his hand, the silver pen still beside him like a relic from a version of the company he no longer understood. Margaret touched the sealed folder and slid it 1 inch forward. Around the table, the board members straightened. Claire remained at the end, quiet and composed, while the city behind her shone through the rain. For the first time that morning, Ethan was not the person deciding what came next. The room held Margaret's refusal for one long second, and in that second Ethan saw something shift across the table that he had not approved. Board members straightened. Legal counsel's empty speakerphone light blinked near the center of the table. Sophia's hand lifted from her nameplate, then settled again, less certain than before. Ethan recovered by force of habit. He smiled, not warmly, but with the practiced patience of a founder used to converting disagreement into procedure. Margaret, capitalization updates are important, he said, but we have a full agenda. Sophia's appointment is the strategic item before us. He clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a new slide. Chief Brand Vision Officer, proposed scope and authority. Beneath Sophia's name were the privileges Ethan had dressed as business necessity. Executive office access, attendance at leadership meetings, media approval authority, investor event representation, discretionary branding budget. Claire read each line from the end of the table and felt the old company recede behind the polished vocabulary. This was not leadership. It was a stage being built inside a business that had already asked too much from exhausted employees. Sophia leaned toward the board with a gentle smile, as if the title had already begun belonging to her. I understand there may be sensitivities in the room, she said. Her eyes moved briefly toward Claire, soft enough to deny intention, exact enough to bruise. But Montgomery Dynamics is at a point where perception matters. Investors need confidence. Employees need a visible direction. The market needs to see that. The company is not trapped by personal history. A board member near the glass wall shifted in his chair. Another looked at Margaret, then at the sealed folder. Ethan nodded, pleased with the performance. Exactly, he said. This is not personal. It is governance. Claire almost looked at him then, but stopped herself. He had always liked using clean words for messy choices. Governance. Alignment. Future. Commitment. He could place those words in a row and make betrayal sound like a quarterly plan. At the center of the table, the silver pen caught the blue light from the screen. Claire remembered the first contract it had signed, the first investor who had taken them seriously, the first time Ethan had held that pen as if it were a promise they shared. Now it lay beside Sophia's appointment packet, an old witness dragged into a new insult. Margaret opened the sealed folder, slowly enough that the sound of paper separating became louder than the rain against the windows. Ethan's smile thinned. Are we really pausing an executive appointment for paperwork? Margaret did not look up. We are pausing because board authority may have changed. The words landed with quiet weight. Sophia's smile held, but only at the edges. Changed how? She asked. Margaret removed the first document and placed it before her. The header was visible to the nearest board members. Change of control notice. Claire kept her hand on her own black leather folder and looked out at Manhattan through the glass, where rain traced narrow lines down the skyline. Ethan set the remote on the table. This is not the time for confusion, he said. Margaret lifted her eyes. There is no confusion. Outside counsel has confirmed that a controlling interest was transferred before this meeting began. The speakerphone flashed again, then chimed softly as legal counsel joined the line. No one spoke. Sophia glanced at Ethan, waiting for him to make the room obey him again. For the first time that morning, he did not reach for the remote. He reached for the silver pen, then stopped before touching it. Margaret turned one page, and the name of the buyer remained just out of view, hidden beneath her hand like the final card in a game Ethan had not known he was losing. The speakerphone filled the boardroom with the calm voice of outside counsel, and somehow that made the silence feel even more expensive. This is Daniel Pierce from Ashford Legal, the voice said. We are on the line to confirm receipt of executed change of control documents from Montgomery Dynamics. No one reached for water. No one moved a chair. The blue slide behind Ethan still displayed Sophia's proposed title in clean white letters, but the room was no longer looking at the screen with belief. Ethan stood at the head of the table with the remote beside his hand and the silver pen close enough to touch. Yet for the first time that morning, the objects around him seemed to belong to another version of authority. Daniel, Ethan said, making his voice warmer than his face. We can address capital structure after this agenda item. The board is in the middle of an executive appointment discussion. Margaret Hale looked at him over the top of the folder. The board cannot vote on a new executive authority package before recognizing voting control. The words were procedural, but they carried a door closing inside them. Sophia sat straighter in Claire's old chair, her fingers no longer resting on the nameplate, but beside it, as if touching it had become less safe. Surely a brand role does not require all this drama, she said softly. A few board members looked down. Claire kept her eyes on the folder in front of her. Drama. That was what people called accountability when it arrived before they were ready. Ethan stepped away from the screen and placed both hands on the back of his chair. The founder posture. The one he had used at investor dinners, product launches, magazine interviews, and quiet arguments at home when he needed the room to remember his title before questioning his choices. Let us be clear, he said. This company was built on vision. My vision. I respect early support, but support is not leadership. History is not governance. We cannot let old personal relationships interfere with strategic momentum. He did not say Claire's name, and that made it colder. Sophia lifted her chin, sensing his attempt to reclaim the room. I agree, she said. There is a difference between helping someone begin and being qualified to lead what they become. Her eyes moved toward the end of the table, where Claire sat with the visitor badge still clipped to her coat. Some women are important in the past. That does not mean they belong in the future. The sentence hung there, polished and cruel, beneath 58 floors of Manhattan light. Claire felt every board member hear it. She felt Margaret Hale hear it. She felt Ethan hear it, and choose not to correct it. That choice, more than Sophia's words, drew a clean line through the last soft place in her heart. Ethan glanced at Claire then, perhaps expecting pain, perhaps expecting anger, perhaps expecting the old version of his wife who would lower her voice to protect the room from discomfort. Claire only opened her black leather folder and turned one page. The sound was small, paper against paper, but it pulled more attention than Sophia's speech. Margaret's eyes followed the movement. Outside counsel spoke again through the speakerphone. For governance purposes, The buyer's representative must be acknowledged before any vote proceeds. Ethan's expression tightened. Who was the buyer? He asked. Margaret looked down at the document beneath her hand. Whitmore Capital Trust. Sophia blinked. The name meant nothing to her at first. To Ethan, it meant too much. His gaze moved sharply to Claire, then away, as if refusing the answer could delay it. That is impossible, he said. Claire finally lifted her eyes. She did not smile. She did not lean forward. She only rested her fingertips on the closing packet in front of her and spoke in a voice quiet enough to make everyone listen. Margaret, she said, has the controlling representative been recognized? The board chair held the room for one breath, then turned the final page of the disclosure folder toward the light. Margaret turned the disclosure page toward the room, and for a moment the boardroom seemed to lose its reflection in the glass walls. The city was still there, silver under rain, taxis moving 58 floors below, towers shining through. Low clouds, but no one looked outward anymore. Every eye had moved to the document beneath Margaret Hale's hand. For the record, she said, her voice measured and clear. Outside counsel has confirmed that Whitmore Capital Trust has acquired controlling interest in Montgomery Dynamics through voting agreements, converted debt, and a private block purchase completed prior to this meeting. The speakerphone gave a faint electronic hiss, then Daniel Pierce's voice followed with legal precision. That is correct. Required notices were delivered this morning. The board is obligated to recognize the new voting control before proceeding with any executive appointment or authority package. Ethan stood very still. The remote lay on the table beside the silver pen, both suddenly useless. Sophia's slide remained frozen behind him, her photograph glowing beside a title that had not yet been approved and now looked almost embarrassing in its confidence. Sophia looked from Margaret to Ethan. What does that mean? She asked, her voice quieter now, stripped of the softness she had used when speaking down the table at Claire. Margaret did not answer her first. She looked toward the end of the table, where Claire sat beneath the visitor badge Ethan's reception desk had given her. The controlling representative of Whitmore Capital Trust is Claire Montgomery. The words did not crash through the room. They settled, calm and exact, into every polished surface. A board member near the window removed his glasses. Another closed the gray agenda packet Sophia's appointment was printed inside. The assistant standing by the credenza lowered her eyes to the floor. Claire remained seated for one breath longer, not because she needed drama, but because she refused to perform power the way Ethan did. Then she unclipped the visitor badge from her coat and placed it on the table beside her black leather folder. The small plastic card made a quiet sound against the wood. Observer. The label looked foolish now. Ethan stared at it, then at her. You bought voting control? His voice was low, caught between disbelief and accusation. Claire opened the folder and slid her matching copy of the closing packet forward. The trust bought control, she said. I represent the trust. Sophia's face tightened. But he is the founder. Claire looked at her then, fully and without anger. A founder can start a company, she said. That does not mean he gets to use it as a stage. The room absorbed that sentence more deeply than it absorbed the legal announcement. Ethan's jaw worked once, but no answer came. Margaret placed the disclosure page on top of Sophia's appointment packet. The paper covered half of the title Chief Brand Vision Officer, leaving only the word vision visible beneath the legal text. Until the new controlling representative is recognized, Margaret said, the proposed appointment is paused. The blue light from the screen turned Sophia's ivory suit cold. She looked at Ethan again, waiting for him to restore the certainty he had promised her. But Ethan was looking at Claire as if he had just realized she had not come to plead for a chair. She had come with the room already changed. Claire stood slowly. Her reflection rose in the glass behind her, quiet against the Manhattan skyline. For years, she had watched Ethan occupy the center because she had mistaken love for support and support for disappearance. Now the boardroom turned toward her without being asked. She did not smile. She only reached for the silver pen near Ethan's hand, the one he had once given her after their first funding round, and moved it to the center of the table. Before we discuss any future leadership, she said, we are going to discuss how this company forgot the people who actually kept it alive. Claire did not raise her voice after the room turned toward her. She had watched Ethan mistake volume for authority too many times to borrow his habits now. The silver pin rested in the center of the boardroom table, no longer his trophy, not quite hers either, but a witness to the years between them. The blue slide behind Ethan still held Sophia's frozen title, half covered in the room's embarrassment, while the change of control notice sat on top of the appointment packet, like a final correction made in clean ink. Margaret Hale looked at Claire with the same steady professionalism she had offered the company for years. "How would you like to proceed?" she asked. Ethan's expression tightened. Sophia sat very still in Claire's former chair, her ivory suit bright beneath the cold conference light, her nameplate suddenly too polished, too loud, too temporary. Claire looked down the table at the board members, then past the glass walls to the employees moving in the open offices beyond. Engineers stood near monitors. A project manager carried a stack of folders. Someone in a gray sweater laughed softly at a desk, unaware that the company above them had nearly traded substance for image while calling it strategy. Claire placed one hand on the black leather folder. "First," she said, "the proposed executive appointment is paused pending independent governance review." Margaret nodded and made a note. Sophia's lips parted. "You cannot just pause my role." Claire turned to her calmly. "It was never your role. It was a proposal." The room absorbed the difference. Ethan stepped forward. "Claire, do not make this personal." That almost made her smile, not because it was funny, but because men like Ethan always discovered professionalism after using public rooms to wound private people. "I am not," she said. "That is why you are still standing here." His face changed, a small loss of color beneath the practiced calm. Claire continued. "Second, all discretionary branding spend tied to this proposal is frozen. Finance will redirect the available budget to an employee retention and severance reserve until the review is complete." One board member, near the window, lifted his head. Another looked at the engineering attrition chart in his packet with visible discomfort. Margaret wrote again, slower this time, as if the room had finally begun recording the company honestly. Sophia looked at Ethan, waiting for the man who had introduced her as the future to protect the future he had promised. But Ethan was staring at Claire. He was seeing, perhaps too late, the woman from the Boston apartment, the woman from the copy shop, the woman from the server room floor, the woman he had reduced to legacy observer without noticing she had become the controlling representative of the company he thought would always orbit him. "We should talk privately," he said. Claire picked up the visitor badge from beside her folder. "Observer." The plastic edge caught the rain-gray light. "You had years to speak to me privately with respect," she said. "Today, the company comes first." She set the badge beside Sophia's nameplate, not with anger, only with precision. Two labels on the same table. One falsely small, one prematurely grand, both corrected by the documents between them. Margaret closed the appointment packet. Outside counsel confirmed the pause over the speakerphone, his voice calm and distant. The meeting moved on without Ethan controlling its direction. For the first time all morning, the agenda changed because the truth required it. Claire gathered her folder, then reached for the silver pen. She did not keep it. She placed it beside Margaret's notes. "Use it for the review authorization," she said. "It should finally sign something useful." A few board members lowered their eyes. Ethan said nothing. Sophia looked away from the nameplate she had touched so proudly minutes earlier. Claire walked toward the glass door, passing the chair that had once held her name and did not need it back. The city beyond the windows shone under rain, silver and unforgiving, but clean. She left the boardroom with her dignity intact, the company protected, and the quiet certainty that she had not bought back a marriage. She had taken back the work, the truth, and the future he tried to give away.